Hey guys, BigSquareRoadToRoot.com with your Friday road trip for December 6th. We have some big things going on the repo side, but also a very big thing going on the silver, the physical silver manipulation side. I'll get to in 1 second, but first a Zero Hedge article. The Fed hasn't expanded its balance sheet at this speed since the financial crisis. Da, da, da. We all know that already. Has QE4 begun? The 1.2 trillion per month hole in the repo market. Yeah, see, that's the thing. Again, as I've talked about, most commentators will add repos to the total. So every day there's a repo that the Fed's involved with, it gets added to the total, but that's not actually true because repos are overnight repurchases unless it's a term one. So it's a better way to look at it, the total running balance of the repo operations, because it's paid back the next day. So it's not like the Fed gave out 1.2 trillion. They didn't. They financed 1.2 trillion over the course of the month, but it was paid back. That type of thing. So it's a better way to look at it, in my opinion, is a running total of the repos, the term repos, and the flat out treasury purchases, or the POMOs. All right. So what I wanted to show you about this is the Fed balance sheet is being recorded correctly. Now, the overnight repos do not go on the Fed balance sheet, but the POMOs do, and the terms don't. So you can, just looking at what's going on right now, this is definitely into QE4 territory at 150, 160 billion of the flat out purchases, and those are going on every day. So they usually go 7.5 billion and then about 2 billion. 1 to 2 billion. 7.5, 1 to 2. So we're up over 160 billion as far as, so yeah, that is QE4. It's bigger than QE1, 2, and 3. Not put together, but definitely bigger one than 1, 2, and 3. But they won't say that. The thing I really wanted to show you is at the end of this article, he's making the argument that to tell, I'll just read it to you. The Fed can recognize that they found the floor of the total amount of reserves necessary in our new regulatory environment and add some reserves via another round of QE as cushion and grow the total reserves in line with our GDP. This would allow us to stay in the ample reserves regime. The key metric, and this is where this guy misses it again, the key metric I'd keep an eye on is the difference between the interest on excess reserves and the effective funds rate, which I show below. We made the switch from an ample reserves regime to a scarce reserves regime in December of 2008. So he's looking at the effective funds rate, and he's measuring that against, what's he measuring against? Effective fund rate and the interest on the excess reserves, or the repo. The problem is they just changed how they calculate the repo interest rates. So you won't get 10% again. It's impossible because they won't allow it. They use averages now. So you won't see 10%. So using this metric, it doesn't work anymore since it was about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that they changed that position. They changed the reporting requirements. So basically they're lying about the effective repo interest rate. But I do agree with this. Going forward, whether the Fed pushes effective fund rate below interest on excessive reserves will signal the era of monetary policy. The next era of monetary policy. If the Fed chooses the scarce reserves route, Fed fund rates will stay at or above interest on excessive reserves. Again, they don't tell you what the real Fed funds rate is. The Fed will continue to buy short-term securities as necessary to meet demand for reserves and push down the short end of the curve. I bet on the yield curve steepening again. I wouldn't, because they rigged that number. If they choose the ample reserves route, Fed funds rate will fall back below interest rates on excessive reserves. The Fed will go back to buying 10-year bonds, and I'd expect to see further flattening of the yield curve. Here's the line I agree with. Unless banking regulations change dramatically, my guess is that QE4 is coming. The banking regulations are about to change. They've already talked about it. And it will probably happen by the end of the year. If it doesn't, because there's people pushing back in Congress. If it doesn't, then yeah, we're going to see QE4, boom. But Jamie Dimon's already been screaming about it. And we got year end when they have to report it. So it'll be really interesting going forward. Anyway, let's take a look at the change, another change that happened in the repo market. For you private road members, you can find this page on the private road. I'll show you where it is. If you just log into the private road, and it is right number there, the fourth down. Fed repos on December 6th. Click on that. I update this chart. I try to do it every day. I haven't quite been able to do it every day, but pretty close. Right now, today, it was interesting because we had about a $18 billion drop, which is rare. I'm like, what the hell is going on? So it went from $356 billion to $338 billion needed for the weekend, $339 billion. So about $17 billion drop. Now, the reason this happened is, one, we had a term expiration that went on 11/21 of $19.95 billion. Every time before this, when there was a term expiration, we would have a corresponding new term repo put on. So normally they'd put on another 19-20 billion. This time they didn't do it. And I'm like, wait a minute, why didn't they do it? What's going on? Are they getting their shit together? No, they aren't. So here's my take on this. If you look at right here, is 12/6. That's today. So it's 19.95 was paid back to the Fed on this term repo. It was a 2-week term repo, or 10-day, or whatever that is. And the next term repo isn't until 12/12, the next expiration of the term repo, which is $21 million. So for the next 6 days, there's no term repos. So I looked on what's the plan, and voila, here it is. There are two, count them, two injections of money between now and then. One is for at least $25 billion. The other ones are at least $35 billion. So that's $60 billion will be put into the repo market with nothing coming out. If it's maxed out, that's where the drop in 20 is very misleading, or drop of 18. So it drops 18, but they're going to add 60 next week. That's crazy. I know. I live this life. That's crazy. So I expect this to jump 60, which gets us at 400 billion by the end of next week. At least 400 billion. Crazy, right? And this is going to have to increase more, or they're going to have to change the rules by the end of the year. So we will keep an eye on that. I'm going to do a timeline post probably next week for private road members. So keep an eye out for that. All right. So that's what's going on with that. Here's the big news in silver. The number one physical silver rigger, Glencore. Those of you who've been on the Glencore, first I'll say Glencore faces bribery probe by fraud. Office investigation, sending shares in the miner plunging 9%. British investigators have begun an inquiry into the alleged bribery at the miner Glencore. The Serious Fraud Office revealed yesterday it was looking at the conduct of business by Glencore, a group of companies, its officials, employees, agents. Glencore is the most criminal operation ever run on the history of the earth. Glencore, for those of you who've been on the road to Rudolph long enough, this is Mark Rich's company. We all know who Mark Rich is, the number one commodity rigger on planet Earth. From the physical side, they're also gigantic into silver derivatives, gold derivatives, metal derivatives, everything. Go to roadtoroto.com. Actually, I'll put it below this, a link below this post to this article. It's about Mark Rich, the Clinton pardon. He was top 10 FBI's most wanted list for decades, and Clinton just pardoned him out of the blue. It was classic. Mark Rich is a commodity trader and rigger, always has been, for the Mossad. But see, that's the other thing. He's more deep state than anything else. Or he was. He's dead now. But he was more deep state than anything else. But he played for all sides, wherever the big money was. He ran guns. He ran oil out of Iran and Iraq, or Iran when it was you weren't allowed to. This guy was as dirty as they come. And his buddy who arranged all the physical movements, something Pincus, I think. Let's look and see what it is. This is I wrote this article in 2015. So what happened with Mark Rich Corporation is they were on to Mark Rich. He got on the most wanted list, so they split up the company, one into a public company called Glencore, the other into a private company called Trafigura. But both sides had the same traders, same rigging operation. It was criminal. But Glencore had to be more upstanding, so they turned into a mining company. It's all about the logistics when you're moving hot metal, so to speak. So read this article. The head of Trafigura was murdered or died suddenly, sorry, on September 30th, 2015. The chairman, Cloud Dolphin, this is deep state, as bad as it gets. If you know anything about Mark Rich, I suggest read a book called Metal Men. It's called Metal. I got it over there somewhere. It tells you the story of his real name is Mark Reich, from Germany. Bad news, bad news, bad news. Deep state all the way. Works for the Mossad. It's just bad. It's bad. But this is a great sign for silver lovers because they're going after Glencore. Glencore was untouchable. You're not allowed to go after these. And all of a sudden we see JP Morgan traders getting busted. Glencore being busted for bribery. That's the least of what they do. Then this. Glencore CEO Glastonbury hints he may leave sooner than expected. More of the company old guard will leave next year. Shares slumped. Glencore executive Ivan Glasenberg, who was one of the rich boys, Mark Rich's traders were called rich boys, told investors to prepare for leadership changes, hinting his own departure may come sooner than previously anticipated. They are all in trouble. Quote, there are not many of his old guys left, said Glasenberg, 62, referring to himself and his peers as the third generation of leadership of the company. He said that the retirement of the remaining managers of his era should happen during 2020. They're all gone. They're all leaving. Wow. And these are traders that literally rig every market on the physical side. So if you want to rig just via derivatives, you can do it through JP Morgan. If you want to rig through any commodity, the real thing, you want to ship oil somewhere or hide oil or ship metals in and out of the warehouse, out the front door, in through the back door type of stuff, it's Glencore and Trafigura. Very interesting. But for more than a year, Glencore has worked under a cloud of the U.S. Department of Justice probes possible corruption and money laundering at its mining operation. Absolutely corrupt. I didn't know that investigation was still going on. Let me see. Let me click on that. Glencore, this is back in July. Glencore drops after U.S. orders documents in corruption probe. So this is still going on. How freaking long does it take the DOJ to actually do anything? We have to keep the system together. But great sign that the UK is going after Glencore because that is part of the destruction of the silver cabal. And then this. Glencore investors to sue for billions over probes. Institutional investors of Glencore will sue the world's biggest commodities trader for share price declines from bribery investigations in the US, UK, and Canada. A law firm representing them said after the latest probe was announced. Boyle Schiller Flexner said the suit is expected to run into the billions of dollars after Glencore disclosed on Thursday that the UK's Serious Fraud Office was investigating it, prompting a 9% drop in the price. Keep an eye on Trafigura. That's the other edge of this criminal cabal. These companies were both owned by Mark Rich and run by Mark Rich and people behind Rich, was probably the Mossad, maybe ties to the Vatican, all kinds. It's just bad. If you want to rig a commodity, Mark Rich was your guy. That's what Clinton's strong dollar policy was all about. He hired Mark Rich to rig the prices of gold, silver, oil, physical commodities, so that Clinton could run his strong dollar policy. Remember that? Strong dollar policy. Anyway, I am going to link this article at the bottom. It goes deep into, it has to do with Bernie Madoff. This is all the same criminals. So and it's a pretty long article. This is back when I used to write articles. Now I just talk on YouTube. But this is one you want to read because it'll give you an insight into how in the world can physical commodity like silver, which is extremely scarce, not go down in price. Look at the price of gold compared to the price of silver in the last 20 years. Gold blew by its $800 high and now is at $1,400, right? So it's 150% of its all-time highs from the early 1980s. Silver, early 1980s, was $50. And then 2011 briefly hit $50 on the rig job by Bill Daley. But silver right now is trading for a third of its all-time highs. So gold's at 150% of its all-time highs. Silver's at a third of its all-time highs. Get your silver. And I know Glencore is knee deep into silver derivatives. So it'll be interesting where all this is going. Anyway, that's your Friday road trip for today. Stay tuned next week for the update on the timeline. Putting together the pieces right now. And again, nobody knows for sure when this is all going to happen. But there are signs, and I'll let you know what the signs are. This is Bix. Talk to you later.